So I first made a film that came out in 2014 in Argentina called Erasing Dad. And I had been living in Argentina for many years, and I had met a man who then became my life partner or husband. And the first thing he told me was, I haven't seen my daughter for 6 years. And like a lot of people, I said, well, you must have a very bad lawyer. And then slowly by slowly, I realized he had a great lawyer who was working pro bono on his case. And all of the judgments were actually in his favor. But it had been 6 years since he had seen his daughter. And those 6 years eventually grew to 13 years of zero contact. So right there, so going on that journey with him and then meeting other fathers who were in the same situation, it really gave me a sense of the legal system. And my first film, really, Erasing Dad, really focused on the legal issues. And also it was from the father's point of view. And I definitely say fathers because in Argentina, before we made the film, custody automatically went to the mother because they were still using what's called the tender years doctrine. And the tender years doctrine says young children should always be with their mother because they're better caregivers. And after the film came out, Argentina did enact joint custody legislation. Now, when after that film came out in 2014, I moved back to the United States, where I'm from, and I wanted to make a follow-up film. And my first thing that I noticed when I came to the United States was, one, just on social media, a lot of mothers were talking about not being able to see their kids. So I realized I couldn't take a gendered approach to this issue, but also because social media had exploded. And when I made Erasing Dad, I was like, well, how on earth could I even try to interview kids if their dads can't talk to them? How can I talk to them? And now there wasn't even really Instagram when I started this, but Facebook, now Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, kids, sometimes as young as 7, make videos saying that they can't see a sibling, that they can't see a parent. They're talking sometimes directly at the judges saying, I'm not happy with the decision. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, there's actually a way for me to reach out to children because I can reach out to them directly and then with their parents' permission, or if they're over the age of 18, not with their parents' permission, actually interview them. And the process of finding children who were willing to share their stories, and then also had good stories to share and who were good on camera, because you can't have someone who gives one-word answers on camera. That took about 1.5 years to find. So I would scour Facebook each day. I would look for videos, usually parents sharing videos of how they were reunited with their kids, or if a child shared a video, and then reach out to them and then go through sometimes a year-long process of trying to build trust. And there were a few cases where I would build that long process only for them to then at the last minute say they didn't want me to be interviewed. And basically everybody in the film, and they were all scattered all over the US and Canada right before I would go to interview them, usually the day before would call me and say that they didn't want to do it. And then I'd have to, with the plane ticket already bought, the crew already hired, have to convince them to be in the film. And I'm a firm believer that telling one's story not only is cathartic and healing, but it's also important for other people to hear those stories. And even post the film coming out, Ashlyn, who, as you probably remember in the film, said she wanted nothing to do with her mother. And I tried everything to get them to be on camera together. I think I even offered them a trip to Disneyland at one point. I said, like, well, I'll make it fun. After she saw the movie, she now is talking with her mother, who she swore she would never talk to ever again. So I think that's just like one case of telling a story having a positive impact. But I thought that, there's also another film called Divorce Court that came out about 5 years ago. And I highly recommend it. It's very informative. It focuses so much on the judicial aspect and the money and the parents who might lose $500,000, $1 million. which is important, but at the same time, I don't think it moves people as much to create change, because when someone says, oh, I lost $500,000, I mean, my first reaction is, well, that must be nice to have $500,000 to lose, it doesn't build sympathy. And I think by focusing on the children's experience is something we can all relate to, because we've all been children and we all have families, even if they're intact families. Just going back to that vulnerable state of childhood is, I think, a very powerful motivator. And we often forget, what the children are dealing with. So that's how I decided from the beginning that it would be based on the children. And also the other thing I'll add is that you can have great laws, and if they aren't followed, if the judges won't use them, if there's no consequence to them not being followed, and society thinks it's not a big deal, they're completely useless. And just to wrap up one little thing I said, so my life partner, who's now my ex, he did reunite with his daughter at the age of 21. So they did finally reunite, and they have a great relationship now, and she reached out to him. So it is possible, even after many years, for a child to reach out. And also, I also focused on the kids, because seeing how ineffective the courts could be, I was like, okay, the only thing left to do, if we can't have a judicial solution, is to talk with the children and young adults and show them that there might be another side that they're missing and another source of love and compassion. And it's worth it to them to investigate, because they've aged out of the system. So it really is on them to reach out.
Thank you. We had a question from Mia who was curious, and you picked up on this in your comments. It was about social media and how that's changed custody battles and separation of families and so on. And her question was, should social media posts be considered off limits or during custody issues? And I guess I'm asking you to comment more broadly about the rise of social media and the complications that have ensued now that everyone has access to this enormous amount of personal revelation and information.
So I think it cuts both ways. I actually gave a talk about this, and it's not so much what we do see in the film is Dizzy's daughter refusing to have any contact with him and using as her reason, one could say excuse or valid reason, a post where he attacks the mom. And every day on social media, I see parents attacking each other. Sometimes they're trying to try the other parent on social media. So they'll publish whole text, like, I saw, this is what happened when I asked for custody. And they'll be like, no, you curse word, curse word, curse word. You're never seeing your daughter again. You curse word, curse word, curse word. Then the other parent says, well, you curse word, curse word, curse word are a narcissist because you're not letting me see my daughter, curse word, curse word, curse word. And they say, like, how'd I do? And then everyone, maybe there's 100 comments of like, well, your ex is obviously a narcissist and a curse word, curse word, curse word. And this is what you should say, or well, you're the problem because you mishandled this. So people are so desperate for help. They're trying to get attention to their case. What it ends up happening is a lot of people feel put off by that because nobody wants to get involved in he said, she said. So I always advise parents to keep this about how expensive and ineffective the court is, to keep all the criticism on the system and to never mention one's ex. The other thing I remind the parents, which a lot of them are shocked to hear, is that even if they can't communicate with their kids on social media, because a lot of them are like, oh, I don't know where my kid is, I can't find them. Like, oh, they're watching you. And they go, but I don't know their profile. I'm like, you don't think your kid knows how to make a fake profile? And they're like, no. And they're like, okay, well, yeah, every kid knows how to make a fake profile. They probably have multiple fake profiles watching you. And then if you're bad mouthing your ex, which is their parent, then you're just confirming everything that they've heard about you. That being said, there's a lot of parents, not a lot, but quite a few cases where there were gag orders. I think they have recently been ruled to be unconstitutional. And I remember there was one parent who was sitting in jail under contempt of court for years for posting on this on social media. So I think that ideally there would be education to go along with parents about how this is ineffective and giving them the contention they need so they have a therapist, a group therapy, so that they can feel heard and helped, because these parents are turning to social media out of desperation. They don't know what else to do. So they form these either groups where they kind of form like public self-help groups, or they're really desperate and they think if the media would just listen to their case, there would be a sense of change. So I think it's damaging. I also think judges throwing the books at parents for posting is not the best way to go about this, because they should see why is there such frustration. And I always think the answer is education, by showing parents that, you know, when you badmouth the other parent, you're badmouthing half of your child. And I don't think parents get that. And I was actually talking to a dad yesterday, and he was like, oh, I'm filing for bankruptcy and I have to take a credit class, like a class on credit. And he goes, but when I got divorced, there was no class that was required for me to take. I know in some jurisdictions they require classes. They vary in how good they are. You know, I would love if they could, you know, show all or parts of a racing family. So I know there's some really good classes out there, but I think it is shocking that in a lot of jurisdictions you can have a divorce with kids involved, and at no point does anyone attempt to educate you on mediation, on toning down the rhetoric or anything like that. So I think that's a place where a lot of change can be made.
Thank you. We had a question, and I know quite a few of the counselors in the program, and maybe those listening are planning to be school counselors or work in a school setting. So the question came up, how can a school counselor be prepared for these kind of issues? How can they advocate? To what extent can they better understand how these issues play out, and what's their role as a counselor in a specific situation that's removed a little bit from the legal system? Do you have any insight into that issue?
Yeah, so I think the school can play a very positive role, and most school counselors and teachers who I've talked to about this issue are aware of it. At the same time, they're like dealing with so much. They're dealing with kids with food insecurity, bullying, not having school supplies, that it's kind of like, oh, now you want me to learn about this other issue. There's too much on my plate already. So I think that goes to, unfortunately, how school counselors are underfunded. I'm actually working on another doc right now about higher education, and just the shocking stat that there's 1 million high school students who have a police officer in their school but no guidance counselor. And the average ratio of guidance counselors in the US is, I think, 1 guidance counselor for 800 students. And the recommended is 1 for 250, which is still really high, you know? So I think guidance counselors are dealing with a lot. So I think my big takeaways for what you can do in a school is, 1, parents always have right to the educational reports, feedback, report cards, parent-teachers meetings, unless there's a specific court order saying that they don't. So what a lot of parents do is they come in and they say, I'd really like it if you don't send the dad any information because he's abusive. And the school says, of course. That right there is illegal. And I think schools don't know that. Now, only in the case of a restraining order is a parent not allowed to have, and the restraining order has to be with the children, not the ex, is that parent not allowed on school grounds and to participate in activities, right? So if any request is made, the legal documentation has to be provided, but it can't just be someone saying, and I've heard of school counselors, saying to parents who are divorced, do you want the other parent to get the information or not? Because we'll just won't send it to them. And that's worsening this problem. And then the other thing I think schools can do to be more proactive is whenever there's a school event, like a graduation, a holiday play, anything along those lines, if they could send home a letter or an email that says, we know there's a lot of parents who are divorced and separated or never married, and that also what you're all going to be dealing with in 5 or 10 years isn't so much divorcing parents. There's going to be a huge spike in never married parents. So that's what's coming. And we've already seen court cases where they say, I don't want to share custody because I had a one-night stand with him. I don't know who he is. And that's going to be about half of all children in the US pretty soon if the demographics continue. So you're going to be dealing with people who don't even know each other, who've had a child together, and are going to come to you and say, I don't trust them. I don't know there's families. So they're not even going to say they're a bad person. They're like, I don't know this person. I knew him for an hour. And as crazy as that sounds, that's what you're going to be dealing with in 5, 10, 15 years, more so than divorce, is to send home communication saying, we know that there's a lot of parents who don't get along. We will gladly seat you separately at an event, and all parents are welcome. That right there sends a message that a child doesn't have to choose, because when my parents got divorced, the first traumatic thing that happened to me, I was doing 8th grade graduation, and they both said, we can't stand each other, pick one. And as a kid, I said, well, I pick mom. But I loved my principal, and if she had sent home a letter saying no child should be forced to choose, because back then we didn't do emails, we had actual letters, and I would read them. I could have just said, look, Sister Kathy, who's my principal, she says I don't have to choose. So having something and maybe posting something on a billboard where kids can see you never have to choose, I think that's the message. And that also, if a parent doesn't have custody and is having trouble seeing their child, if the school can also, if they let parents in for lunch or volunteering activities, encouraging that. And I have seen a lot of cases where a parent starts volunteering at the school, maybe not even with their own kids, but over time is able to build a better relationship. So the schools can have an immensely positive role beyond providing therapy or counseling, which often, I'll be honest, the guidance counselors are so overburdened. So it's just teaching kids, you don't have to choose. The school is a safe space for both parents, and we won't make you sit next to each other if that's too much. We won't make you stand in the same photo. Those little things do mean a lot, because that can be a huge contention for the families. And, if parents can go and have lunch or volunteer, making sure that both parents know about that, or having like separate parent-teacher meetings if necessary, but keeping those parents involved, because also a lot of parents, especially fathers, become disengaged because they just feel so unwelcomed that they're like, it's not that they don't love their kid or want to be there, but they're like, I can't get arrested. I don't want to go to school and be treated like a criminal when I haven't done anything wrong. So always being engaged. And then if there's a court order, you follow it. So if someone says, you can't see, I don't want the other parent seeing my kid, where's the court order? Because parents have a right to their kids' academic records, no matter what.
Thank you. I've had a couple of questions about finances and child support. Because money seems to play into, and this plays into another part of the questions that have come in. It appears that other systems do things, other countries, nations do things a bit differently. Sweden, of course, is mentioned quite a bit in this context. So I'm just wondering, to what extent is the adversarial nature of our court system, and this is recapitulating a couple of questions. I'm wondering, to what extent is it driven by the money interest? So in terms of setting child support, states get money from the national government to go after people who aren't paying child support, or for the system. What's the money influence behind a lot of these child custody cases?
I think the money influence is huge. So with middle class and upper middle class families, lawyers are incentivized by billable hours to stretch these cases on, to create conflict when they are necessary. But I always think the issue is that you can go to court. After having worked on this and interviewed with so many families, I would say family court should not exist, or it should be saved for only the most, I would say it shouldn't exist. I would say, or the most egregious cases. But this isn't contract law. These are children, and putting people who are upset and angry and the divorce is happening for a reason to fight and say the worst thing they can about each other. I just think this creates huge stress, and it's encouraged because to win a legal battle, you really have to go after the other person. So I don't blame the lawyers because they're doing what they're taught, which is to be advocates for their clients. The problem is that there is a forum at all that exists that says that, and especially that a judge who doesn't know you, who has all these cases, are going to make these huge decisions that, and most judges, and this is very different from jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but in a lot of jurisdictions, the judges have no training on child psychology. They rotate in and out. Family court can be seen as the punishment court, where, and by that, like, you put the judges there who have messed up in other courts. So that's the real issue, is that people aren't given access to good quality mediation. There's also a lot of mediators out there who say you work it out amongst yourselves. So they have to be trained in these high conflict types of cases and also in personality disorder. So I think with the money, and I'm a firm believer that there needs to be support, a financial support of the child. So I don't think the solution is to get rid of child support, but it has to be based on what the child needs. Ideally, and this is what's hard in the US, what ideally should happen is the government should say, to raise a child, you need X amount of money, let's say $500, $1,000 a month. And then both parents should split that equally. Now, I would say, and you can call me, you'll probably see my political affiliation with this, if the parents can't meet that, then the state should step in to make sure that each child is taken care of. And I think we can do that as such a wealthy nation. Because when I went to a child support summit, this was after the film, so much was how to get desperately poor dads to pay small amounts of child support to the desperately poor moms. And right now, if someone has no job or is making $7 an hour, there's no extra income there. So all of this burden of putting people in prison, which costs money. So, I mean, I always think about, like, I know in California to put someone in jail is $75,000 a year. I'm not sure how much it is in Louisiana. I'm going to guess it's less. But even let's say it's $35,000 a year. Wouldn't that be great just to give that to the family? Like, why are we putting poor people in jail, for being poor? So that's the aspect I focus on. But I mean, there's a lot there, but I think money plays a big role because you incentivize people. I think the trick with reforming the system is how to create something where you're not creating these perverse incentives, because in a way you can almost always say anything, if people really want to get the other person, they'll always find something that incentivizes them to do so. So I think that's the policy challenge, is how to incentivize getting along. At the same time, supporting people who are going through abusive situations. That's the $1 million question.
We've been joined by Michelle, and I'll probably mess this up, Yexigian Jordan, who is
That's
the
right.
impact. Pardon?
You got it right. Close enough.
No way. That's amazing. That must be a first. Is the impact campaign director for Erasing Family. And so she's also here to help us out with our discussion. Thank you so much for coming. Anything that you've heard so far that you'd like to comment on, Michelle?
Well, first of all, I love what Ginger said about the school counselors, what role they can play. And I would add one more thing, because this is a pathology. And for those of you who are mental health practitioners, the basis of this pathology, it's rooted in personality disorder pathology, and it's also rooted in family systems issues. So kids who don't have the skills or the ability, and parents who don't have the ability to work out conflict. Typically, you have one parent who is reasonable and a good enough parent, and another parent who's unable, because of personality disorder, to operate in a cooperative manner. That doesn't mean you can't help these families. The problem is when you put that dynamic in an adversarial courtroom, the court not being educated will get it wrong. And the parent who's reasonable will actually show up worse than the parent who's lying. And so the other issue that Ginger mentioned was if the court would enforce or if the court would reward. So those are the two things that personality disorder responds well to. They respond well to consequences or coaching. That's it. They don't do therapy. They aren't able to tell the truth. And I'm giving you this brief background for you mental health practitioners to understand that you're not going to convince somebody who has this that what they're doing is harming the child. You're just not. But you can incentivize them if the court will issue some type of a consequence, because most of these parents have already have joint custody orders, but the parent with the pathology is not honoring the court order. They're actually obstructing the parenting time with the other parent, and the court typically does not issue a severe enough consequence to get them to stop. So the biggest suggestion that we have as an organization is we would like to see that the court, when these cases present themselves before they're allowed to litigate, which can take years. Anyone who's been through family court knows, especially with COVID, it can take 1 to 2 years just to have your case heard. And the case is usually just a bunch of complaining and not necessarily a valid reason to be keeping that child from the other parent. But by the time it gets to court, the child's already been manipulated. And it's very difficult to help these kids unwind from what's happened. And then the court gets it wrong because then the kid presents as not wanting to see that other parent. They become resistant. And so the court's aware of this dynamic. They aren't in agreement yet. Mental health is not in agreement of what it's called. It's actually attachment trauma, by the way. And the kids are showing protest behavior, but most of the mental health people, if they don't understand what's happening, they will misdiagnose it. So having the professionals have this background in not just personality disorder pathology, but they should have a background in intimate partner violence, in attachment, in family systems, and in complex trauma. And if you are going to practice in that field, you should be educated in that role so that you can actually diagnose what's happening. And instead of trying to pick the worst parent, you can, with your diagnosis, you can create a whole family plan that can help the family be successful post-divorce. So that's what we are hoping by putting this film out there in front of the students, because the systems are right now, they're pretty stuck in the way they do things. Attorneys don't want to change what they're doing because they don't want to fall out of grace with the judges or the other attorneys. And they aren't 100% sure what they're dealing with either. So, so they're so busy trying to follow these guidelines when things are changing. And by the way, we also stay away from parental alienation in the film because one of the primary goals of the film was for children who had experienced this to be encouraged to reunite. When you label something, it will actually cause that child to reject watching it. They won't want to go anywhere where they can see what's really happening, because that means that all of a sudden, after they were forced to reject one parent, now they have to see what happened, and the parent that they aligned with has this problem. So we also are trying to encourage counselors to let them know that if your parent does have a personality disorder, as long as they're not gonna, physically harm you, you can still love that parent. You just have to teach them how to, recognize what's happening, teach them boundaries, and then how to love around their parents' faults. Okay, so those are some of the things I just wanted to touch on, because we really hope that you'll check out our resources on our website. We have a lot of different resources from different therapists who know how to treat these families. And we do have something there as well for school teachers.
Thank you, Michelle. You answered one of my questions, because as I watched the film and thought about these issues, I was thinking, yes, but people who do end up in adversarial relationships are not always equal, and there are people with mental health issues. And how do you do shared parenting if a parent has a mental health disorder that could be, of various kinds? Going back to a question or a point that was raised by Ms. Gentile earlier, she was saying that what we're going to be seeing particularly in the public schools, but all through life over the next 20 years, next generation, are parents who are not in any kind of formal relationship. And the question was, in terms of parents who've never been married or even been in a relationship, do the proceedings currently in court, are they the same as those in the case of parents who were married but then got divorced? And are the legal fees as expensive, and so on?
So, there's so much to talk about. We didn't talk about this in the film, but it is something that I know a lot about. The United States is an outlier in the world in that it doesn't grant fathers in most states. And I always say, because this is also what's complicated about the United States, is each state is different. But in most states, a father who's not married, even if they are in a relationship, but not married, has no rights or less rights than a married father. So I always advise young men who want to have kids, I'm like, get married. I'm not giving a moral advice. I'm just saying legally, if something doesn't work out, you have nothing to stand on. So often what happens is first you have to prove paternity, because also in the United States, paternity goes through marriage. It doesn't go through DNA. So also if you have a case of someone who has a child from an affair while they're married, the legal father is always the husband. And so that's something also that happens. So you have a lot of hoops to jump through if you want to be the father. There's also no consequence if the mother incorrectly, by accident or on purpose, puts someone else's name down on the birth certificate to collect child support from them. And the only way to get out of this is within sometimes 6 months or 2 years, the father protests. And if you don't, and there have been cases where father was in the military for overseas for 4 years, and he didn't know that there was this paternity claim against him, comes home and says, I'm not the dad. They do a DNA, he's not the dad. And the judge says, well, you let too much time pass. You are the dad and you have to pay child support. And I've seen it cut a lot the other way too, of fathers who want to be involved and then realizing that, most judges will say, well, there's no relationship there. The mother doesn't trust you. At the most, you'll get very limited visitation after you sue for paternity. So it is quite different in Argentina, because, looking at the faces here, I'm sure everyone's way too young to remember this. So back in the day, in all countries, they would stamp birth certificates of children who were born out of wedlock with the term bastard. There's a great book, Bastard Out of Carolina. And a lot of countries, seeing that this caused a lot of stigma, reform the laws to say that a child is the child of anybody who is the parent. The United States is still very much behind that. So in Argentina, for example, a child has the same rights to inheritance, everything, whether they're born of a marriage or not. But depending on the state, and maybe someone knows the laws in Louisiana better, it can be night and day what the rights are for an unmarried father.
We had a question that was raised about, in regard to married couples specifically, do you think it would be better if there was counseling sessions before marriage where people really specifically dealt with how they plan to raise the children, how they would approach arguments, and then what would happen if divorce arose or things like that? So this kind of entering the relationship and setting out how they feel about it that moment would create a record that they could look back on in the event that they did divorce, or in the event that they were having trouble figuring those kinds of things out. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first, you can do that. It's called a prenuptial agreement, which has a very negative connotation in our culture. But I actually follow a lawyer on Instagram. Instagram's a wonderful thing. And she is trying to educate people to not get into these custody battles. And the way she puts it is like, you do have a prenup. Everybody has a prenup. It's called the state law. And that's going to decide what happens. And all a prenup does is say, we agree on something else within the bounds of the law. There's things that you cannot put in a prenup. So I think I would advise that for everybody. Also, interestingly enough, in other faith cultures, like for example, Judaism, all Jewish marriages have to have a marriage contract that's like a prenup to get married. And they display this at their weddings, and they can even list who will do the household chores if they want to. It can be very detailed or very broad. So we have a cultural aversion to talking about this because we are so romantic and say we never want marriage to fail when half of them do. And also seeing, talking to people, parents who said, we never agreed what religion our kids would be raised. We never agreed who would be the stay-at-home parent because we never talked about this because people get into this whole romantic bubble. So I think counseling, all for it. My fear is that if you put too much burdens on people getting married, they just might not opt out and decide not to get married. Or go to another state or, Las Vegas where you don't need this. So I think that's always the issue. I would almost say that this has to be taught in health classes in high school where for most places, it's sex education, which could be abstinence only education. It could be very biologically based. It could be about STDs, but there's almost no education, or it's very rare, about what does a healthy relationship look like, how to set boundaries, how to negotiate. And so I would say almost pre-marriage counseling is almost too late. These are skills, and we can teach children these skills in the context of other classes, like how do you negotiate a relationship? How do you set boundaries, which could also work with your boss when you're working, with friends, with family members, healthy boundary setting, healthy expectations, not being afraid to talk and mention things. I think those are lessons that even if we're not having a curriculum, we can always say, always talk. Talking usually makes things better. But you're so right. So many of these parents, they come in with completely different expectations. And it's so obvious that they never talked about not only what could happen if they could divorce, but what they wanted the marriage and the parenting to look like. So all for it. And I would say even earlier, teens, when kids start dating, that's when to teach them what boundaries are and what a healthy relationship looks like. And also so they know, because we often focus of this is what abuse looks like, but we also have to say, and this is what a healthy relationship looks like. You can both you can disagree and you can argue, but it's not violent. No one walks away. There's no silent treatments.
Thank you. As you were talking about maybe introducing this into high school curriculum or giving courses or sex education, I was just thinking, God forbid that the legislatures ever get a chance to craft this curriculum, which is what typically happens. But there's a question that takes us in a slightly different direction, and I think probably many of the people in the counseling program would be interested. Is there a connection between the developmental stage of a child and the repercussions that come from the divorce process or the divorce court or the divorce settlement? So that would be the first question. So the impact between those proceedings and developmental stage of the child. And secondly, has that or could that be used as an argument to help make the process better for parents and children?
So I know after I talk, there is a panel of experts and practitioners, and I want them to speak towards the developmental stages. Okay. The one thing that I can say that I've seen a lot of, and this is most people find this surprising, is that it is in a way easier to manipulate a teenager than a young child to reject a parent, which seems completely bizarre to people. The reason why is little children, especially under about 5 or 6, are very incapable of lying. So any decent social worker can say, do you want to see your dad? And there's a video of this, and they'll say, no, I don't want to see my dad. Why? And the girl breaks down and cries, or they'll say, I don't know, but I said what I had to say. Can I get my candy now? Like the kids just kind of break out of it very quickly. As children get older, especially teenagers, they can be bribed. So a lot of it is, you say you want to live with me, you get a car. You say you live with me and there's no curfew in my house. You can do whatever you want. That's so common with kids. Oh, I want to be with this parent. So, and that creates conflicts. You have one parent that wants to set boundaries, discipline, and then one parent who says, you can do whatever you want in my house. And if the judge says, who do you want to live with? Who do you think the kid's going to say at 16? Disciplined parent who's probably doing what we would say is better parenting, or the parent who says, you can go out all night long? They're going to go with that one. And then the other thing too, is that they can see, they can understand what the future is. So they might feel the need to protect siblings. They might feel more loyalty. So in a way, those things can be manipulated more than with a young child, where a young child can just be taught to kind of parrot, and that falls apart. And it's generally the older children who feel, who are more prone to lying and being believed and coming up with these elaborate lies, which we saw, how guilty they feel afterwards. But I want to leave off the actual development to the experts, but just to keep in mind that like older children can be more manipulated than younger children in a way.
That's perfectly understandable and probably a good move in terms of leaving that discussion for a bit later. I want to, I'd like to remind people that I will get to your questions. If somehow I've missed your question and you would like it asked, please just re-enter it again and I'll be glad to get to it. I wanted to ask a question about the best interest standard, and maybe you could talk about that. So what was previously the norm was the paternal preference rule in common law, giving rule to the father. That's switched in the 19th century to the tender years doctrine, which had a predilection towards giving custody to the mother. And now we've moved on to what might be called the best interest standards, meaning quote unquote best interests of the child. But I'd like to hear you comment on what best interest means, if I can put that in quotes, and is there a sense in which this plays into the prejudices of the justice who's hearing the case?
Yeah, so I would say best interest is the same as nothing, because it's not defined anywhere. If we say best interest is what the child wants, children over the course of their development can have a better relationship with one parent than the other and switch. I mean, I think we can all remember this if we came from families with two parents that at one point were closer to dad because he was really into sports. Then, dad got too into sports. It was too stressful. So we like being with mom. Then mom got boring. So we went back. Like, that's normal. And if you ask a child at any point, that's very clear that they're just saying how they feel at that moment. So I feel also that a lot of this structure in family court was created, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. It was created to help families who are going through highly abusive situations. And I think we can all imagine a situation where, and I'm going to go with, go full in with the cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. A woman comes in with a black guy. They ask her, did your husband meet you up? She says, no. And the judge is like, well, I have to do something. Their hands are tied. So we created these laws that can remove an abusive person from the house, make sure that they don't see their kids. And those were created with the intention to protect. The problem is now is that these laws, which were created to deal with severe dangerous abuse, are now being used in cases where the abuse, I heard of one case of a dad losing his kids because of the lunchbox, and he couldn't believe it in court. But the mom didn't send the lunchbox with the kids. The daughter took a shoebox and decorated with glitter and said, oh, dad, I now have a lunchbox. And he was like, that's so creative. And that was a sign of neglect, that he sent the kids food in a box that shoes used to be in, because that's abuse. So that to me is the concern, that these laws, which are very well intentioned and designed to create solve a huge problem, which was that domestic violence was seen as a non-problem and nobody had any recourses. So with the best interest standards, what you basically have, and I love what Jen Harmon says this, is that when you don't have any reasoning, you just have judicial bias. So what this means is that if you don't have to justify the decision, because when you are married, you automatically have custody. So with these custody battles, it's not about someone winning custody, it's about someone losing the rights that they already had. I think we forget that. And we just use these, so these can be manipulated in some cases, these well-intentioned laws. And at the same time, they're not actually giving people help on how to move out of it, of being an abuser if they are, of helping people, of giving people the skills that they need. I'm a firm believer in that people can learn new skills, they can be redeemed. And if someone is being abusive, it's probably because they were abused as a child. And there's no reason why they can't unlearn that behavior, but that needs a lot of help. And it's not just pushing someone out of the family, but we often don't structure in a way forward. And because this, because this doctrine is so vague, what is good parenting to one person is abusive to another. I mean, one extreme example is spanking, which most development experts say isn't good, but it's very common in some parts of the U.S. But some judges would say, "Oh, you spank your child, you should never see them again." Strictness, can be seen very differently. I saw a case where a dad talked to his child in Russian because he was Russian. And a lot of parents would say, "Oh, that's wonderful, bilingual." And the mother said, "That's abuse because they're talking a language I can't understand. How do I know he's not teaching the child to insult me?" And she won. So that's the problem with these nebulous definitions. And so one fight that a lot of reformers are trying to do is just to say, and this is bizarre that this is so contentious, that if a judge removes custody, they have to say in writing why. Because right now they don't have to say anything, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And then so I think that's the main thing that, and also the other big issue is that a lot of judges, not so much mental health, but judges and lawyers to some extent, there's all this new literature about childhood development, brain development, and they're not reading it. I remember one person sent a judge a lot of stuff on childhood development, and he said, "I don't want to read anything scientific because I don't want to be biased." And that's not an uncommon attitude.
If I could follow up with that, you kind of read my mind. I was wondering, to what extent is there a standard of training for judges who serve in family court? I know that judges here in Louisiana are elected. Are they required to know anything about families or to have any kind of training whatsoever? And maybe not in Louisiana, but in any state in the United States?
I don't know the laws of every state, but in most places, any judge training is optional. So they can require lawyers and psychologists with continuing education credits or however you credit. But because there's no judge accreditation, I often joke, how do you get judges to watch something? And the only answer I know is I saw a lot of judges come to a seminar on this because it was a free lunch at the Beverly Wilshire. And a very rich parent, a billionaire, put together this lunch that probably cost $100,000 all in. And tons of judges were there because it was a free lunch at a beautiful hotel. But there was no obligation. You can't obligate them to go or watch something. So it's a huge problem, whether they're elected or not. But there definitely exists training for judges, and some judges spend a lot of time training on this. But what it also means is that a lot of judges then rely on experts, which in some cases the parents then have to hire, which in my mind, that's a huge conflict of interest. And they say, if you watch The Marriage Story on Netflix, he says, "I don't know what to do. I'm going to appoint a custody evaluator." And then whatever that person says, the judge will just accept.
And I would like to add to that too, if you don't mind, that a new field of psychology was created specifically for these cases called forensic psychology. So forensic psychologists have guidelines under the AFCC, which is the American Family and Conciliatory Court System. Their guidelines are, first of all, these people are typically witnesses for the court, but yet the parents are paying $10,000 to $30,000 for these evaluations, thinking that they're going to get a solution for their family. And instead, they're just basically helping the judge make the decision with an expert opinion. However, even these forensic psychologists they're acting outside of their first of all, their obligation not to do harm because they're told by the AFCC not to diagnose. Now, in some states, I have heard that these forensic psychologists do diagnose, but they're not allowed to use the diagnosis in the presentation to the court because of a presumed prejudice. So the system itself is so messed up. They've removed clinical psychology, who would be the psychologist who could actually diagnose these families. They've removed them from the court and added this new type of psychology that is not correctly diagnosing. They aren't required to have the experience in family systems or attachment or personality disorder, but yet they're conducting these evaluations, and then they're basically making a recommendation to the court. So a lot of the parents, again, are unaware. There's no education system for the parents going through this. They have to spend hours trying to find out, what am I facing? So that's important information for those in the mental health field and in the legal field.
I just want to add something to what Michelle said, which is that with some exceptions, and the exceptions of abuse need to be taken very seriously, and I would say much more seriously than they're taken now, because right now it's like get a restraining order. A violent person doesn't respect a restraining order, but the parents who are nonviolent respect the restraining orders, and it's very easy to get a restraining order. But beyond that, like, one thing I've seen talking to so many families is that from the outside, when there isn't clear abuse, that's like physical or extreme emotional and verbal abuse, trying to pick the better parent or dissect who's better, it's so impossible. And that's why I think the goal should always be to help heal and get both parents involved as much as they can. Because once you try to decide, it's like, how do you decide? Someone, both parents are saying it's because also, in any other court, it would be hearsay, what they're saying. So I just think it's almost impossible to do. And if all of this time, money, and energy could be spent creating a system to help as opposed to blame, that to me is the big shift, is getting parents on a track to work together, acknowledging it might take years if it's a very contentious divorce for them to decrease. But that to me was the big lesson from Sweden. Wasn't a particular law that they had, but just that the societal expectation is that over time, you will not be so angry at each other. And right now we have an expectation like things should just get ramped up and ramped up and ramped up.
Following up on that, relations between parents, is there a way for parents who are in a custody battle to be mandated by a judge to see a family therapist? Is there a point at which that would be helpful?
So in a lot of jurisdictions, yes, family therapy is mandated. The issues a lot of times therapy, and I say this as someone who's done a lot of therapy, and I'm in therapy, and I think therapy is great. It's not often the best way to solve a complex family dynamic of just doing talk therapy. What these families need are coaches, and people can do their own individual therapy, but the problem, and I'll pass this over to Michelle, who can briefly explain what some of the dangers of therapy are in these situations. But yes, you can be mandated, and also whatever Michelle says, we want to say this is not saying that therapy isn't great for individuals.
Okay, so I can add to that. First of all, for the therapists out there, there is an author. Her name is Chloe Madanes, CLOE MADANES. She's one of the top attachment specialists in the world. And she co-authored a book with Tony Robbins. Everyone knows who Tony Robbins is, and it's called Changing Relationships. So if you're working with this family dynamic, it's an absolute must read. And in that, she talks about how this attachment issue is rooted in personality disorder pathology, which will not respond well to therapy. And the reason talk therapy doesn't work is, but she does say that it responds well to coaching. So a combination of the two is actually best for these families. One who's in mental health, who's combining it with a family coach who has experience in this dynamic. That is what will be most successful for these families in keeping them out of litigation and moving towards a whole family solution. And the other reason talk therapy won't work and a lot of therapists get it wrong, is the children actually come to believe a false narrative. So in psychology world, that's called an encapsulated persecutory delusion. That's actually the term for that. This child will carry this false narrative and false belief system sometimes through their whole life. If they are going to a therapist and the therapist never interviews both parents, it's not uncommon for parents who are creating this pathology in their children to never allow the other parent in the room. They'll take the kids to other therapists that will sit there and they'll repeat this false narrative, but that therapist never does meet the other parent and starts giving therapy for something that's not real. So of course it doesn't solve the problem because the child is still missing a parent and the child is conflicted deep down. These kids have lots of anxiety, lots of self-harming, lots of eating disorders, all the different things that come out of, you know, having a wound that's not been healed. So that's the main issue with therapy, is not being able to correctly have the experience to correctly diagnose what's happening.
This is a follow-up on something we were thinking about a little earlier. In terms of social media, if you document some inappropriate or troubling social media posts that one of the parents is making or texts, can that be introduced as evidence in a custody case? And this may be a question that would be better answered by Ms. Paula Bertuccini, our lawyer, but you may have a view on this as well.
There was a recent Supreme Court case in Massachusetts, which I think set precedent that there is freedom of speech with this. I think instead of introducing evidence, I would say, could this be a teaching moment for the parent on how to maybe get them to delete it and learn how to make healing posts that actually draw attention to their suffering, their kids, and help heal. So I think, you know, can you introduce it to within family court? Maybe it'll help you win. I would say I don't think that's the overall strategy should be healing. And I do often talk to parents when I see them posting, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, say like, hey, your kid could see this. And also anybody else looking at this just thinks you're crazy. You know, it makes you look bad because as soon as someone says my ex is crazy, everyone says, well, you probably are crazy too. What are you not telling me? So I think, you know, making sure people have an appropriate avenue, which would be individual therapy or group therapy, to work through these issues, seeing why they're feeling hurt. And if someone says, the judge is so unfair, they're not letting me see my kid, I think that the real mature response would be to say, well, how can we work through this, as opposed to putting someone in contempt for using social media. It's a huge problem. I also would love if the social media companies could put a button saying, are you sure you want to post this? With they have the AI to do this if some keywords come up, and say, and then they won't censor you, but you know, they say, we've noticed some words, we're gonna put this on an hour hold to see if you still want to post it. But it's a huge problem beyond parents too. If anyone has spent any time on Facebook knows, this is a huge societal problem that goes beyond divorce.
Yeah,
I did want to answer, as far as our jurisdiction in Louisiana, absolutely, it is rare that I have a case that does not have social media posts in it. And I often find parents using it to align people with them to attack the other parent. It has been so disheartening to see what people will post. And socially, we see our presidents, our congressmen saying anything that they want to say about another person. And it is absolutely affecting these relationships, these ongoing parenting relationships, in the most negative way.
Yeah, someone said, as a political scientist who followed the election quite closely, I was surprised just now when someone said that mentioned an inappropriate post because it implied that there would be an appropriate social media post. I haven't seen many of those lately. But moving on to a question that we have about the role of a coach. Can you define the role of a coach you were talking about? Is this a credential that you get, or is this a credentialed professional you're referring to?
I'll pass this off to Michelle, but I want to say that beyond credentialism, it's also a way, like when I do therapy, my therapist, I'll say, oh, I don't remember what really happened with my parents or something. And he's like, it's okay, just make it up, because their therapists are focused on feelings, working through emotions. And a coaching dynamic is much more on results. And as Michelle said, when you're dealing with people who have personality disorders, because that's the thing, you're going to find these parents, you can't reason with them, but they do respond to very clear directions. So Michelle, if you could define like what actually a coach does that's different from a therapist, or how a therapist can act as a coach.
Sure. So a therapist is focusing on what you're doing now and how it's affecting the outcome around you. And then bringing you into the parts of your brain that would be your critical thinking parts. So instead of staying focused in one area, which is the past, you are actually encouraging that person to think outside the box, so to speak. So for someone with personality disorder, the coaching works better for them because there's no wrong answers in coaching. It's more getting them to think a little deeper, or maybe to have more flexible thinking. So it's skill building. It's different than therapy. So you're focusing on skill building. You're focusing on accessing the parts of the mind that people typically don't access with personality disorder. So that's why if you read Changing Relationships, and yes, by the way, there are accreditations for coaches. There's ways for coaches to be accredited. You can do all different types of accreditation. And it is not to remove the role of the therapist. Honestly, in these situations, you really do need a combination because they will both operate in a different capacity. So the therapist is there to be the specialist, say in the family systems therapy, which is teaching them how to resolve conflict, how to interact, etc. The coach is there to encourage that person to dig deeper, to have flexible thinking, to learn how to manage their emotions, identify them, make peace with their emotions, which allows them to grow as human beings. So that's why it works well to have the two when you're dealing with this type of issue.
We are getting very close to the next section of our program this morning, when we're going to bring in Mr. Walter Camos and Valerie Dugas and Paula Bertuccini, my apologies, to have a discussion with us. But I thought right now, everybody's been sitting and listening for a really long time. I was thinking perhaps it might be a good time to take a little bit of a break. Before we take that break, like a 5-minute break, maybe Ms. Gentile, do you have kind of you're certainly welcome to stay and participate with us as long as you want, but we're going to move the discussion on after this. Do you have anything specifically you'd like to say kind of as we move into this next phase?
I would just say that the best analogy I heard about this, I didn't come up with this analogy, is that when you break an arm or a leg, you go to the hospital, you can expect that all of the doctors and nurses are going to try to set your leg, that there's a protocol on how you set a broken bone, and then you'll get physical therapy to help you walk again. And with all the complaints about our healthcare system, I would say we would all agree upon that, right? But if you go to family court because there's a problem that you can't resolve, and we have to remind people go to court because they can't resolve this on their own. That's not what you often find. You find people who want to assign blame, who want to sometimes lengthen the problem, and there's people in the system who are trying to do good work and then often feel very frustrated by the system around them. So I would say to all the practitioners and future practitioners, if you can always remind yourself, how can we help this family heal? And some families, less intervention might be more. For some families, and I've seen this, it's one good talking to of being like, you're messing up your kid. And these are for people without personality disorder. Look at yourself. This is crazy. And they might snap out of it. For some people, that intervention where they can really be filling their parent and their kids' lives might take months or years of classes, but there should always be a path forward, and the expectations should be reasonable. And it's not about creating perfect parents. It's about creating parents who are healthy influences most of the time, because no parent's perfect. And always remind people that, it's because then kids should be able to learn how to deal with difficult people, and those difficult people might be their parents, because otherwise the lesson is just cut people out of your life and erase them. And through life, we're going to deal with difficult bosses, friends, people in the supermarket who are difficult. And we need to learn how to engage and enact and set boundaries, not to say, I want nothing to do with you, you don't exist. And the real problem is the erasing, saying, mom's my birth mom, dad is my sperm donor, which is very different from, I have a very complex relationship with my dad. There's some good things, but he did a lot of bad things. That's where we want to get the kids. So it's not about whitewashing, but just finding a path forward. And I'm just always encouraged with every interaction with your clients in the future to say, how am I moving this towards healing? How am I getting the conflict to go down? And if the conflict ever increases, like, how can I win this custody battle? Like if someone says, how can I win? To me, that's a red flag. There's no winners in family court, and there's no winners in custody battles. And if someone comes in like that, there really should be an encouragement to try collaborative law, where lawyers can still, make money, mediation, and not, and almost like, even when I see parents who have claimed alienation, and they're probably correct in my opinion, but they say, I want to win, I'm going to show them. I'm like, you're just flipping. The child's going to go from one parent to another, and they're just going to live in conflict. So to me, that's the big red flag whenever anybody says, I want to win a custody battle. And I've seen parents who have had very tenuous, bad relationships. And the ones who I feel, hopeful for are the ones who say they can always find something positive about the other parent. They're always watching the best foot forward, or they just don't talk about them. They do what's called parallel parenting, which is 2 separate rooms, and what goes on in the other house we don't talk about. But children can adapt to that. And those are the parents who I feel for, when they still manage to say something positive, and they really focus on their kids and what's best for their kids. And those are the parents who can't see their kids. That's when my heart really breaks. And there's millions of them in the US. And I think together we can all help these families move out these horrible dynamics, and really providing kids with a blueprint to have healthy relationships the rest of their lives.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Gentile, and thank you for your lovely movie. We very much appreciate it, and your presence here with us today. My clock says it's 10:46. Maybe we could come back around 10:50, 10:51, somewhere in there, a little 5-minute break so people can stretch their legs without feeling guilty or anything. So I encourage you to do that. And we look forward to our next discussion with Ms. Valerie Dugas, Mr. Walter Camo, and Ms. Paula Bertuccini, which I will quit messing that up at some point.
And it sounds like fettuccine.
Ah, Bertuccini. Okay, that makes it easier. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think we are all reassembled here. Let me introduce the three people who will be leading our discussion in this next part of our section. Walter Camos is a LPC in private practice since 2011. He has a master's degree in He has a master's degree in experimental psychology and a master's degree in counseling. So he's a double master. We're also joined by Valerie Dugas. She has a PhD, which she received in counseling psychology from Walden University in 2014. And we are lastly joined by Paula Bertuccini. She earned a Juris Doctorate, a law degree at the Paul Hébert Law Center at LSU. She practices family law in Lafayette, Louisiana. So welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Just initially, as a way of starting, perhaps we could have Ms. Dugas, Mr. Camos, and Ms. Bertuccini start off by just having initial reactions to the discussion to this point, and maybe whatever points they feel might be important to talk about as we move forward. Ms. Dugas, would you like to start, or Mr. Camos, who would like to open?
Go ahead, Valerie, you can start.
Well, this is the second time I've seen this, so I don't know how it was for you guys, but it was very emotional for me to see what these kids are going through. Just so sad. Matter of fact, we were just talking that I actually cried the first time because these kids are just so distraught, and they don't have any resources, and they have no one in their corner in a real way that helps stop what they're feeling. And that's the problem. It continues. They have people that are supporting them and they're fighting for them, but it's not in a way that stops what's happening. I don't know what you guys' reactions was to what you saw, and I think the discussion is really spot on. This is so far reaching that these get clogged up in the courts, and I'm sure Paula's got experience with that. But what happens, some attorneys don't think that this exists. Some attorneys don't think this. Some judges don't. What do they do? What do these families do? The real recourse is in the therapy offices, but then we also have therapists who aren't skilled or knowledgeable in this area and do more harm than good. I know for me personally, this has been quite a few years of research, of reading, of attending workshops, and even more so for Walter, just trying to get a very baseline understanding of this, and because it's really complicated stuff. That's about all I have right now. I'll throw it over to Walter.
I'll be happy to let Paula go first.
Well, my first thoughts on it, it's not a good feeling to feel that you're part of the problem. But by the time somebody's walking through my door, they have an agenda. And I don't agree. There's a handful of family law attorneys in this city and where I practice that get it, that we need to get these people out of court and with mental health care as quickly as possible, because the longer they stay in the court, the more money that's spent, the more devastating the damage is. But it's only a handful. And we can start out with the best intentions. But we're also bound to defend our clients against opposing counsel who may not have the best intentions, who may be working hourly. One of the ways that I address it in my practice, because you get worn down and you can forget to be good. You can get angry. is I do flat fees. And I don't agree that any family law attorney ought to be charging hourly. It doesn't lend itself to ending conflict. I do disagree. My judges are dedicated family court judges, and they are torn apart. Some incredible speeches have been given in that courtroom. And on my side, I often feel frustrated because there is just so few therapists who are bold enough to allow themselves to be brought into a situation where they may have to come testify. They, our hands are tied with, Mr. Camos and Ms. Dugal have lent themselves to the court. But I've got therapists that refuse to speak on behalf of the child, forcing me, if it's necessary, to put a child on the stand, the most horrible thing you can do. Therapists that refuse to release notes, therapists that don't take notes or claim not to take notes, therapists who will not see my clients if they know that they're involved in litigation. And so, there's a lot of things that need to change on both sides. One other thing I'd like to mention, and I'm sorry to keep talking about our jurisdiction because I think this was meant to be broader, but in our jurisdiction, I think last year they said about 11,000 suits, I'm rounding up, about 11,000 suits had been filed in our parish. Nearly the upper range of 6,000, closer to 7,000 suits were in family court for 2 judges. The monies that are collected from those suits do not go back into family court. The clerk of court in our parish utilizes those funds to pay various expenses in the courtroom. Therefore, even though we're the most active and the most lucrative for the courthouse, the money that we are bringing in does not go back in to have social workers to work with these indigent families. Creating a setting that would be less confrontational, feel more like mediation and instead of a courtroom. Programs like Better Options. Better Options in Lafayette Parish just got out of reach for many parents because now it's $550. Better Options in our parish is a program that was an 11-week program, 1 night a week that had been free. It taught parents to focus on their kids instead of the other parent and to release some of that hatred for their kids' sake. And it was successful for a while. So all those things in my jurisdiction make things a lot harder.
Thank you. Mr. Camos?
Well, I would say that I'm doing lots of therapy these days, and my practice has kind of gradually shifted. I had a general practice, and I work with just about anything. But over the last few years, it's shifted to where a good bit of what I do involves families that are struggling through divorce and separation. I get referrals from the courts and from attorneys, and people come in voluntarily and they come in with court order. And over, we see children struggling, and children want to see both parents. A good example I use all the time is a few years ago, I had a case come in and the children were not seeing their father. And so they were ordered to come to me for reconciliation therapy with the dad. And there were many charges against the dad and complaints. The daughter, which was older, came in. She was probably 14-ish. She came in and she had issues with dad and made some statements, but she wasn't really rooted in those statements, because as I talked to her more, And as therapy progressed, I could see that she really did love her dad and wanted to see him. But the younger brother, a couple years younger, came in the very first session, he just cried. And he said, I want to see my dad. I just can't see, I don't understand. Why can't I see my dad? And so I said, so you're ready to see him now then, if I'm hearing you? And he said, yes, sir. I want to see him as soon as possible. Well, in my practice, when a case comes in, I'll give them 3 sessions. The first one is an intake, and then they can have 2 more if they want them. Because in reconciliation, usually the child hadn't seen the father or the mother in some time, sometimes years, but generally months. And I give them 3 sessions because they typically say they don't want to see the other parent. But I'll tell them on the 4th session, your parent will be here in my office when you come in, because you can't give them a choice for the ones that have already decided not to see the other parent. So they know from day one, the first few minutes of session for the intake, on the 4th session, your parent will be here. And some of them kind of seem relieved, but others, when I ask them, well, how many sessions would you like? Do you want to come back and visit again? Do you want to take the full 3 sessions that I will allow you before you have to see your parent? Some of them will say, I'm ready now. And others take every minute of the last session to push it to the nth degree before they see the parent. So I learned from this case, and this has been probably 3 or 4 years ago, I got with the mom and I said, you know, Mom, we're doing reconciliation here. It may take a couple more sessions for your daughter before I'm ready to bring her in to see Dad, but your son's ready now. He misses Dad and he was upset. And so I'd like to see him come in next week and see his dad. And guess what happened? I tried calling the mom. I tried contacting through attorneys. And I think it took almost 90 days before I even heard back from the family to where I could continue with therapy. So I learned that if you have multiple children that come in and one is ready to see the other parent and the other isn't, then you have to not make that known too much and take your time and gradually bring both children together with the parent at the same time. Because if one is ready right away and a parent doesn't want it to happen, then it won't happen. And that's just it's a travesty for the children. It's just, it hurts sometimes to watch what they're going through. So yes, do we have a problem in society? We do. But I believe we have some awesome attorneys like Ms. Bertaccini, and we have some very, very good judges who have children of their own and who love children and want to help. It's just that we're a work in process. We're in progress. We're evolving and we're learning more and more every day. And little by little, we'll get it, I think, to where eventually children don't have to go months and years without seeing the other parent.
Thank you. I haven't gotten any questions or any comments or anything from our participants today. So if please, as these distinguished panelists are speaking, please prompt me with questions that I can ask them so that these can be related directly to the kind of concerns you have or concerns you may have in your future practice. Going back to Ms. Dugas, I was just curious about you relating your practice to the things that were covered in the film. How does your education and training and practice so on give you insight into the things that were covered in the film, and what do you use in your practice?
Okay. Most of what I started off working primarily with kids, just various and sundry reasons, not full-on family or any really court involvement, and that kind of changed as I started working with Walter and kind of started learning more about this, and then BOI kind of came to be, and I really got a passion for these kids that are so stuck for whatever reason, be it you know, a lot of these kids also, they think that it's their choice. These are my words, but they're really echoing a parent's, and they can't differentiate between the two. And that creates such a problem for them, both in the immediate and long term. Now we get to see that, and we understand that this is far reaching, and that I think, as Miss Michelle said, that it's attachment trauma. Of course it is. Well, when we don't have a good basis for attachment, what happens? Well, we know that we can have immediate diagnoses, something like a reactive attachment disorder, or we can even have things that don't pop up until later, and they can be both internalizing disorders or externalizing. So we know that these are immediate and can be immediate and can have far reaching. And so I always kind of felt that the earlier we can stop it, the better. We know that that's true. We have data that tells us that's true. But there's already a flux in that their family broke. Well, now it's complicated by all this tension and all this animosity. And so my practice is, you know, primarily under Walter's guidance, has taken on a very more court involved in doing custody evaluations and doing things of that nature, to maybe cut these off at the pass even earlier, before they get caught in the system. I know Walter has had cases that have been in the court system for years. And I just was sent a family that they've been in battle for 11 years. Well, that means 11 years these children have felt unsettled. That's tragic to me, absolutely tragic. So I do co-parenting stuff as well, and also individual, of course, but it has morphed from basic individual stuff to much more court involved. And I think as the need arises, I don't think that this was as prevalent as it used to be. I think it's increasing. And with that, I think we're all going to have to shift hats at some point to really help these families push through. You're muted.
One thing that I would love to see is that film. I'd like it to be required for the litigants prior to entering the courtroom.
Right.
Interesting. Earlier on, we got a question about what can the counselors in training do to make a better system, do to have an effect on the total system. And then I noticed that Ms. Bertuccini said that testifying was a problem for counselors and therapists. And I was wondering, would a commitment to interacting with the legal system by counselors make for a better system? Is that a good way to make changes in the system?
Are you directing that at Paula?
Yeah, I was directing that at Ms. Bertuccini.
I'm going to need you to repeat it, please.
Okay. There was some people early on were commenting after having seen the film or part of the film, geez, what can we do to make this better? How can we change things to the better? And then you said that there was a reluctance on the part of counselors to testify or get involved with the legal system. So I was wondering if you wanted to expand that and just talk about making the system better by counselors getting more involved in the system or being more proactive with interacting and being part of the whole process.
Well, on a personal, my personal concept right now, I'm a member of a group called AFCC, which is the American Family Conciliatory Courts. And it's a group like this. It's psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, lawyers, and judges of family courts getting together to try to create policy and educate. I got to attend a class last year in Pennsylvania, which was a boot camp that combined the lawyers, the judges, and the healthcare providers on how to testify. And, you know, right now we're working on, I know we're working on a social to try to get the CME, utilize the therapist's CME group or their local group where they go to get their CME, that we're trying to invade it and get to know them, invite them in and try to one day work toward the CME where we can help them learn, you know, that you enjoy, I can't think of the word. What do you enjoy when you testify and you've been appointed an expert? Guys, help me here. What is it?
Immunity.
Immunity. So that you enjoy immunity, first off. And how often do you not have to whip out your malpractice claim prior to seeing a really angry client? The second thing is, you know, how to write a report that'll withstand what in the legal field we call a Daubert challenge, or Daubert, I think is how the rest of the world says it. And that is the standard of whether you have met your scientific requirements in order to render your opinion. And, you know, this particular class that I took covered that. And then, you know, how to answer questions. And they're the same tenets that we teach anybody who's going through a deposition, anybody who's being interrogated. They're the rules of how to answer, which is, you know, we can do a better job of reaching out and helping educate, hopefully bringing people in, because we can't do it without mental health experts. These are not legal problems. These are personality problems. And, you know, it is absolute, the most true thing I've ever heard, that I've heard this morning, is that nobody's winning in family court, except the lawyers. Except the lawyers. The lawyers are doing fine. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you. We had a request that we go back and raise a question that we had earlier that was deferred to this panel, specifically on the connection between the developmental state of a child and the repercussions that come from the divorce process. So is there a connection between what happens to children based on their developmental age as they go through the divorce process or the divorce conflict or the separation conflict? And if so, the follow-up on that is can that be used as an argument to change the process and make it better for the parties involved?
I believe so. If you were directing that question to me, attachment is probably one of the most basic necessities that a human being has from the time they're born and brought into the world. Just in the first couple of days, the child starts to bond with the mother, and there have been various studies taking place where you look at just removing your attention from a child when they're a toddler. It really gets the child's attention. They become dysregulated and often act out if the mother just stops responding to the child. And that's why timeout as a punishment for children, and really we could say that, you know, to the child it feels like a punishment, because what it is the parent is removing their attention from the child. Years ago when I was in school, we talked about marasmus, I believe is what the term was, and that was a child growing up maybe in a foster home, maybe, or in a orphanage where they weren't getting the proper attention, their needs weren't met, and as they got older, their relationship skills and ability to connect with another human being was just diminished significantly. And today we talk about reactive attachment disorder. If a child is not given the proper bonds and attachment to feel secure enough to go out and explore their environment, as they get older, they have very difficult times in relationships. They may have very short relationship periods, and whenever they reach a difficult juncture in their relationship, they may just completely disengage. Emotional cutoff from the other party. So in the development of a child, if they have two parents, the child is half dad and half mom. If they don't know one parent, then they don't know half of themselves. If they feel cut off from one person, then they're cut off from half of who they are. So in order for them to develop a secure sense of self, grow up and have a fully wide-ranging personality, exposed to the world, they have to feel secure. In other words, rather than being disorganized or feeling that they must avoid situations, if they feel secure, they'll grow up and develop a very good differentiated sense of self. This goes back to Murray Bowen's family theory. And, that's our goal for every human being, to feel free and to feel that they have the right, the basic fundamental human right to grow up on their own, find their own environment, engage in their environment in the way they feel appropriate, and develop their own personality over the course of their life. If we step in and say, well, you have a problem with this parent, so you don't have to see this parent anymore, that's the worst thing we could do, because the child learns from both parents, as do the parents learn from the child. If parents continue to act a certain way, a child will respond to the parent's behavior. And a child can be the biggest mirror there is for a parent. If the child is having severe problem, then the parents should look at themselves. And the biggest issue I find is that there's so much blame and finger pointing. Just to talk about numbers, roughly speaking, in the literature, we talk about 20% of cases, you might call them difficult or court involved, because most parents can make their own minds up. They can be negotiable, they can be diplomatic, they can be co-parents successfully, and the child grows and flourishes and just has a wonderful life. But about 20% end up in court because they are deferring. It's just a diminished sense of agency. They just have no ability to make their own choice. So they're deferring and giving up. They're disempowering themselves by bringing it to a judge and say, look, Your Honor, both of us are pointing fingers at each other and blaming each other so much, we really would like for you to tell us what should happen to our child. I try to encourage people to take that power back and say, you know what? I would rather make my own choices for my child, but I have to find a way to reach middle ground and not be so polarized, because that's a big issue, is polarization. It's all or nothing. It's like binary thinking. And, that's how computers operate, on ones and zeros. Well, I see it in society today that the biggest issue is the lack of an individual to take responsibility for their own actions and statements, and finger pointing and blame. And that just causes polarization. That's what we see in politics today. Everyone is so polarized. It's the freedom of choice. Who is it? Eric Fromm used to talk about the burden of freedom. And I think that's a problem here today. We have so much freedom and so much choice in the world that we've become polarized. And then we idealize and identify with a particular group that has a particular opinion or platform, and we just go with them rather than thinking for ourselves. It's as though we're losing critical thinking in the world today, to where there is so much gray area between black and white that we could spend millennia in the gray area, but yet everyone gravitates towards black and white. So polarity, polarization, all or nothing, one parent's all good, one parent's all bad, inability to make their own choices, and deferring it to a court leads the child through a very, very difficult path to try to differentiate their self, become autonomous, and figure out who they are as a personality. Because in all of these actions, we're building dependence in the children. And my philosophy is teach autonomy. Sorry about that explanation there. Got a little long.
We're getting some questions about, I'm getting some reverb. Not quite sure why.
If you need a minute to look at it, I have a question here. Michelle Hernandez is here in my office, and she couldn't get to the thing today, and so she's in here with me. But she had a question. She said, some parents are receiving child support, and they have difficulty in collecting the child support, and so they have an agency they can contact to get help. And these agencies advocate for the child and for the parent who's supposed to get child support. But what she was wondering is there any agency out there that could help a parent or a child when the child is caught in the middle? In other words, advocate for the child. And, in the cases of one parent being incarcerated, if they're not following the plan, and potentially if a child is being persuaded or influenced against the other parent, then you might talk about that A word that we don't like to talk about so much, the alienation word. And I would say that trying to see a therapist and talk to them and find out about ways to handle these situations, you can learn skills that even if you have to go to court, if you learn about the phenomenon and what you can do to operate through the chaos the best you possibly can, it can make a significant difference in your life and your child's life. For instance, I'll give you this case. A parent was having difficulty seeing one of her children, a boy, and the boy was siding with the dad and didn't want to see the mom, but the mom was letting everyone know how close they were and sending pictures to social media and what have you. And I just told the mom, I said, don't keep your child in the middle of what's going on between you and dad. If you want to have a good, solid relationship with your son, if you go to a baseball game, just tell him hello and be nice to him. But you don't have to hug him in front of everyone and demonstrate how close you are. Just let him decide if he wants to hug you publicly. Because if he doesn't want to hug you publicly, there may be a reason. When he gets home, there may be a price to pay. And so she gradually got out of the public's eye to where whatever relationship she had with her son, it was private. And when the son would go to visit with her now, there were no more arguments. He would lay on her on the sofa, he'd hug her and say, I love you, Mom. But she learned to stop inflaming any tensions in public. So that sounds like a terrible way to have to live a life. But if you still have a wonderful relationship with your child and you're no longer placing them in harm's way to be in the middle of two parents who aren't agreeing, then maybe you're taking a step to help your child.
Thank you. I'm asking a question that was directed at Dr. Dugas, Mr. Camos, and Ms. Bertaccini. There was an idea earlier that talk therapy was not as effective as coaching, perhaps, in some of these cases with families. Is there research backing that up, or is there a way for counselors to use therapy, talk therapy, to work through some of these issues?
You want to take it, Walter?
Well, I would say that there are a lot of approaches out there. Family systems theory talks about it in many ways, structural families. But when you do family therapy, typically what is done is when the family comes in, you begin validating what is going on. You validate each person. But when a family comes in and a child is adamantly rejecting a parent and actually maybe disrespecting that parent, and the child becomes ungovernable, and one parent may be influencing the child in such a way that it causes those communications to escalate, there's nothing to validate. So in many cases, typical family therapy is just contraindicated in these cases because there's nothing to validate. So what you have to do is untangle what's going on and gradually, you could use the word coach, gradually steer the family in the right direction where they start to understand the dynamics, because what typically happens is one parent is pushed to a lower hierarchy in the family. It should be mom and dad are up here and the child is down here at a subordinate position. But what happens is there's a flip in family dynamics to where the child aligns with one parent and they begin to govern the situation, and one parent is pushed to a subordinate position. So we don't want to validate that in therapy. And that's what happens in many cases. If the therapist is unaware of this dynamic, then they're validating an improper family dynamic. And so you have to really understand what's going on to know what to do about it. But over the years, what I've learned is that therapy can help those who are reasonable and want to help their child. Because for some, when they come in, they're so embroiled in a custody battle that their hatred for the other parent is greater than their love for the child. And that's just unfortunate. So we just have to stay focused on trying to help them through this difficult time. And coaching is a good way to begin, but I have a form that I created in the last probably year or so. And it outlines all these statements about, I fully understand that a relationship for my child with both parents would be in my child's best interest. I fully understand that I should follow court orders and facilitate visitation according to the visitation schedule. I understand that there is literature out there that demonstrates a child benefits from a relationship with both parents. And I make the parents answer this. And if the parent answers no to a number of the questions, I tell him, I'm sorry, I can't move forward with therapy, because it's not a therapy issue. It's a belief system within the parent. And I'll talk them through it and say, if you can agree to these things, I'll be glad to move forward. But if not, then I hope you understand, but I really can't. And so after 2 months of therapy, trying to bring children together with the parent that they've rejected, if there is undermining, sabotage, constant problems, trying to facilitate visitations, more accusations of abuse, or some kind of situation or circumstance within the family, then I'll just say, I can't go any further. I think you need to go back to court now. And I'll just send them back to court and just say, there's nothing that we can do in therapy until the parents want to see the child reconciled with the other parent.
I speak on that. I love. Ooh, what happened?
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. I love coaches. I love coaches. Now, I have more acute problems. I'm looking at it acutely. I want to get the problem solved and get on to my next client. My coaches receiving that nasty email or that nasty text or that nasty post, having that coach there to help that parent not return with equal vitriol, is live action training for my parents on how to be better, how not to get in the dirt, in the mud with the other parent, how to model for your child, how you deal with difficult people. I talk to my clients about, for the rest of this child's life, they're going to run into people that challenge them on some level that are not fair, that are nasty or a negative experience with another person. This is an opportunity to model what do you do. And, we talk about being grateful for the opportunity to show your child that it doesn't have to ruin your day. It doesn't have to make you nasty. You can actually feel good about your response. Sometimes, if I have clients that are too poor, and I do a good bit of pro bono, and I don't have parents with Medicaid, the children maybe have Medicaid, parents don't have Medicaid, myself or my paralegal will actually take over their texting or their Facebook posts, or we'll be on call 24/7 to help them answer in a way that's not going to escalate the situation. I mean, right now, we've got a parent that's absconded to Texas with a child, and my paralegal is in there pretending to be the mother right now, showing her how to respond to the father, to try to get him calmed down, to get him back until we can get to court. Because there's nothing we can do until that judge is back on the bench. I also wanted to address, we got a question from Marie Romero Foster. She wanted to know if when I said I would like to see more therapists being willing to testify, and was I talking about custody evaluations? Yes, for people that can afford a custody evaluation or a mini custody evaluation, that's a wonderful thing. But also for my children that don't get a voice in family court, so that I don't have to put that child on the stand, a therapist that can speak for that child, even to look those parents in the eye in the courtroom and say, this child is being ripped apart. It's incredibly powerful. I'm confused about, I often get pushback from therapists. They want to protect that relationship that they've developed with the child, so they're not wanting to disclose what was said in therapy. For my judges to act, I have to have the information. And what can we do in family court besides send people to therapy? Well, we can discipline. If you cannot modulate what you say to your child, I can supervise you for a while, and I can discipline that parent. And I know that is a nauseating idea for therapists, but years in court, years in therapy, at a certain point, we don't have years. We have a very short golden time to make this child's life better.
I have a little something to add there, if I could.
Okay.
I would say that.
I was wrong.
I beg your pardon?
You can't say I was wrong.
Oh, no. I'm on your page. I was just going to say one technique I've been using as far as getting the information out. I believe that we need to get the information out, but it's a difficult situation to do that because sometimes as a therapist writing a report to the court, it's not presented to the court unless you're there to testify. So what I've been doing is asking the two attorneys, the counsel for mom, counsel for dad, to come to my office, and we sit down, the three of us, and we talk about all the little issues, and then I leave it to them to figure out what to do. And actually, we've had some pretty difficult cases that the two attorneys were awesome, and they worked it out, and they talked about it on the kid's behalf. In other words, well, if this is happening here, the other one says, well, I wasn't aware of that, and then they come together. And Ms. Bertaccini was great in a case, and in multiple cases where she is definitely for the child. She may be representing the parent, but she is for the child as well. And so if both attorneys hear the information, then they can take a step to correct it.
Okay. I have a follow-up here for Ms. Bertaccini. Does the court system in Louisiana recognize child psychological abuse as a reason to provide a temporary protective separation from the parent who is influencing the child negatively?
On rare, very extraordinary cases, yes. And in each one of those cases where it was successful, we had a report that was well written and well founded. in those scientific, that layout for that perfect report. And we had that expert up there talking about the studies, talking about the fact that this, an interesting thing in all those cases were that parent who was affecting the child that way actually was told, was informed of the damage they were doing and continued to do it anyway. To get it done, it is possible. It's rare, but it's possible. But it has to be an expert saying that that is abuse. Because remember, when we're in court, we're starting with the, I'm a lawyer who can't remember legal terms. This is so great. Those rights, those inalienable rights that you're born with, the greatest one, both my judges say this all the time, is the right to raise your child in the manner that you find appropriate, as long as it doesn't break the law. So we're balancing your unalienable right to be a parent and to do it your way with the rights of that child. So I have to have that expert there to say, hey, this child is being devastated in such a way, its rights are being devastated in such a way, this parent needs to be disciplined. This needs to stop. If the parent can't stop, they're going to be supervised. If supervision doesn't work, you're not going to see the child until you can demonstrate, maybe you don't drink the Kool-Aid, maybe you don't believe what you're doing, but you're going to stop. Sometimes that's all we can do.
Thank you. We haven't heard much from Dr. Dugas lately, so I was wondering, Dr. Dugas, would you like to talk about therapies or whatever else has come to your mind? I'm sure you're thinking about different things. You're muted, Dr. Dugas.
What has come to mind is I think it's paramount to understand that in these cases, there are times where the parents, they have full knowledge of what they're doing, and they're doing it on purpose. They're doing it on purpose for whatever their motivation is to get their child away from them. But in other cases, they aren't quite as aware. They don't understand the full impacts of what they're doing, or even why they're doing it in some cases. And that's very, very difficult to tease out. And from a therapeutic standpoint, we have to first get the parent to stop doing what they're doing before we can work on the kid. And that is often, and I'm sure Walter would probably agree with that, that's sometimes the hardest part of this, is getting the parents to stop, getting them to stop doing whatever it is that they're doing in whatever way. And what makes that so difficult is that each of these parents actually believes that they're doing the right thing for their child. They believe this is the right thing to do. They are protecting them somehow. They are fighting for them. They are whatever it is, and however they justify it. That's very difficult, because now that's their narrative. And you have to really work really hard to undo that narrative, to say, no, but you're really causing harm, and this is why. So identifying it in the first place is difficult, but then working through it is that much harder, particularly with the parents. The kids, from a therapeutic standpoint, often if you can get the parents to stop, the kids just do. If the parents stop, the kids, then they don't have the conflict, it's not as prevalent, and the kids' behavior you'll almost just see it follow suit. They still require work, of course, and they'll require some therapy, but it won't be as difficult if you can get the parents to stop whatever it is that they're doing. The campaigns of denigration, or the gatekeeping, or whatever it is that the parents are engaging in, if you can get them to stop, the kids will, most of the time.
Okay. We got just like 2-3 minutes left. Any final last words from Mr. Camos or Ms. Bertuccini? Sorry to put you on the spot. Well, at this point,
I'm at the end of the year. What I advertise for and what I select for in my consults is high conflict custody. I find myself at the end of a difficult year that was, I know, difficult for everybody, and a lot of people suffered a lot more than I did. But we saw a huge jump in the breakup of relationships, married or unmarried, with COVID, with people at home with each other. That was disturbing. We saw parents withholding children from the other parent because they had an opportunity. They saw an opportunity with COVID to say it's not safe. The fallout has been a bigger practice than I ever imagined I would ever have for one attorney. And it feels like the wild, wild west right now, because with the hurricanes, the delays caused by COVID, our court didn't react quickly and set up Zoom hearings. And so a lot of people got away with a lot with no discipline. I find myself tired right now and looking forward to closing out this year. We closed for the last 2 weeks. I have to go back to the well. For me, the well is, getting to visit with my friend Walter Camos, going back to AFCC to remember what it is, so that I don't become nasty, angry, seek retribution from my co-counsel. I'd like to see politically, I'd like to see the money that we're earning in family court be put back into our families, instead of drug court and the criminal court, and slush funds for the courthouse. I'd like to see some therapists walking around the hallways. I'd like to see some kind of training film that can speak to someone on that understands on an 8th grade level, and that can speak to people of all educations about what they're doing, what the effect is of what they're doing, because so many of the people that are in court, these are unfinished people themselves, almost like grown children walking around in the bodies of adults, acting like they think someone should act. So we need a new model for them to model off of, besides social media and what they watch on TV. We just have to keep trying and keep talking. I'd love to see AFCC come to our city. I'd love to see family lawyers be required. Again, I don't think family attorneys ought to be able to charge hourly. I would like to see my judges and my family lawyers here in town a member of a group like AFCC that keeps focused on conciliatory practice. So all those things, we can't give up, that's for sure.
Thank you, Ms. Bertuccini. Mr. Camos, last words?
I would like to say Paula is wonderful to work with. She's very knowledgeable on this, and she has talked about AFCC a couple times today. Valerie, Paula, and I, we're all members of AFCC, and it's one of the most professional organizations I've ever been associated with, besides the APA or the ACA, and it's just amazing. And it includes judges, advocates, attorneys, mental health professionals, therapists, evaluators, and we all get together and have conferences As a matter of fact, we have one going on this week, and it would be wonderful if any of you are interested to check out AFCC and maybe consider joining. And I'd also like to say thank you to gingergentile for producing this documentary. It was just awesome, and it's bringing to light a societal issue that we really need to be aware of. And I just think she did an amazing job.
Well, thank you. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Esters and let him take us home. He's got some things that he wants to cover before we close entirely for the day. So Dr. Esters, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you everyone for your attention and your contribution to the discussion. As you probably have heard from me before, this is the second in a series of seminars that we will be conducting on a semester by semester basis. So 3 times a year, we're going to come at this topic, and we are just now getting the ball rolling. And wow, I'm floored by some of the things that I'm hearing and learning. So I hope you share that with me. I'd like to introduce you to Rafael Franco, who is the Family Advocate Network Political Action Committee President, and he'd like to make a short announcement before we adjourn. Rafael?
Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Rafael Franco. I found this to be very, very informative and educational. I'm very happy that I was invited to this seminar today, and I look forward to other seminars as well. And collaborations as well, I would like to let you guys know, I am the president of FAMPAC, which is a Family Advocate Network Political Action Committee of New Jersey. And we are a political action committee. We're seeking to protect the interests of the children of our state and any other state. And it is our mission to advocate for reforms in the family court. We found that there is not greater responsibility that our society has than ensuring our children grow up in a healthy, safe, and nurturing environment. And this environment is modeled in the home and promoted by 2 loving parents, regardless of the family structure in the 21st century. Our organization has and will continue to collaborate with other organizations throughout the state and other states who agree that our children are our most valuable natural resource. Throughout our collaborations efforts, we seek to move the needles in the statewide elections as well, so that we can advocate, inspire, and educate our political spectrum to reform the family court. Okay, so with that said, I also would like to invite everyone who would like to participate in one of our events and seminars as well that we're having on December 4th. These events will be in regarding to the involvement of parental alienation. Okay, and as experts in the field, we will have Dr. Lynn Steinberg and Dr. Jeff Gardier as well, giving us additional resources that we all need to empower our community, as we mentioned in the seminar, give more empowerment and more educational to all parents across every single socioeconomic and educational level. The more we know, the more we empower parents in today's economy, in today's world, in today's environment. We believe that they will be better equipped to make better decisions in the best interest of the children. And they will not, and we will start hopefully alienating the same concept of parental alienation within our communities. So please feel free to attend one of that event. Is going to be a Zoom meeting as well, a Zoom event December 4th. And if you would like to participate, you can either go into our website, www.fampac altogether, nj.org, or you can email me or find me on my Facebook, social media. I have all the social media. So if you search for my name, Rafael Franco, you most likely will find me. You can email me and I can send you the invitation as well. But I will publish the invitation on Facebook and social medias, all the social media, and also on our website so everyone can attend. So again, thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to continue attending all these seminars.
Thank you, Raphael. If you'll send me the information, I'll make sure everybody gets that in an email when I wrap up everything. My email address is esters, ESTERS, @louisiana.edu. So I can, when I get the information, I can share it with everyone.
Thank you.
I will also be sending to participants the evaluation for the webinar, and for those of you that I will see Wednesday, I'll just bring the evaluations with me so you guys can fill them out and hand them to me. I want to thank Dr. Cross, Dr. Dugas, Walter, Paula, Raphael, Ginger, Michelle, everyone who's contributed to this. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation. We've got a lot of work to do, but I think this is a good start. So pay attention to your emails. I'll be sending something probably over the weekend, and you'll have some resources, some guidance to find resources, and the information that Raphael has shared with us today. Thank you. With that, I'm going to hit end on this, and we'll see you next semester. Everybody, thank you.